Chapter 16. While the students were on spring break, the teachers of Nevermore Academy were working overtime, consumed by the astonishing discovery hidden within their very walls. Behind an aging bookshelf, wedged into a cramped, closet-like space with crumbling stone and a narrow hole in the wall, an old wooden crate had been found. Now, its contents were spread out in the grand library for all to see. The Nevermore School Board had been called in for a special session. Principal Weems stood tall as the last of the board members filed through the library doors. Faculty members lingered quietly by the walls, and Miss Thornhill gave a small nod before falling back into step behind the principal. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Weems said, her voice calm but charged with something rarely heard from her, awe. "I realize this isn't how any of us imagined spending spring break, but what we've uncovered is historic. Quite literally." She stepped aside and gestured toward the long oak table at the center of the room, where rows of ancient parchments lay carefully displayed under protective glass and wooden frames. "Yes," she added, catching the board's stunned expressions, "those are real. Original. Untouched for centuries." There was a moment of collective silence as the members slowly approached the table, their shoes echoing faintly on the polished floor. "These were found inside a crate," Weems continued, "wedged behind a bookshelf in what we now believe was once a maintenance closet no bigger than a broom cupboard. It was sealed behind a false wall, and it remained that way for over 400 years. "You're joking," one board member breathed, leaning in to examine the delicate ink markings. "This was just sitting in a closet?" Weems nodded. "Discovered entirely by accident. A group of students, whose names I won't mention, were somewhere they absolutely shouldn't have been. They managed to knock loose part of the back paneling behind one of the shelves. And when we went to inspect the damage, we found the crate." Miss Thornhill stepped forward and added, "It was packed with layers of dried moss and fabric. Someone went to great lengths to preserve these writings." The board members moved slowly down the length of the table, eyes scanning each artifact: lesson plans in Latin, botanical diagrams annotated with sharp ink lines, graded student work from centuries past, and architectural sketches that looked eerily like the current layout of Nevermore. "These were written by a girl?" one member asked, incredulously. "In 16th century America?" Weems inclined her head. "Wednesday Addams. 16 years old. No formal training. And yet, from what we've pieced together so far, she was not only teaching, she was designing, leading, and documenting an educational model that predates most known institutions." Another board member shook his head, still staring. "How could something like this have been forgotten? Hidden for so long?" Weems offered a tight smile. "That's the question, isn't it? There were lesson plans that rivaled modern curricula, meticulous notes on herbalism, toxicology, and the magical properties of rare plants. Graded assignments from children with tiny handwriting and ink-blotted corners filled some of the journals. Each was marked with sharp, assertive Latin, translated loosely as promising work. But you've misunderstood the essence of Nightshade." Even more staggering were her linguistic breakdowns: Latin, Italian, Spanish, French, languages dissected with grammatical charts and side notes referencing ancient texts long thought lost. "This girl was running an entire school," one board member said, almost reverently. "Alone. With no formal training." Still, a few members looked unconvinced. One man squinted down at the parchment beneath the glass. "How do we know she actually wrote all this?" The lead historian stepped forward, not missing a beat. "Because we've compared every page to the terms of surrender, the original, not a copy. The same document preserved and on display at Pilgrim World." That made heads turn. "You mean the treaty?" another board member asked. "The one that ended the war between normies and outcasts?" The historian nodded. "Wednesday Addams didn't just sign it, she drafted, revised, and finalized it. That's common knowledge. Her handwriting is unmistakable. Every loop, angle, and flourish identical across both sets of documents. Her pressure patterns match. Even the ink composition is consistent with samples from the early 1600s. A hushed silence fell over the room. The weight of what they were witnessing began to sink in. "So this wasn't just a hidden stash of writings," murmured one woman. "It's the rest of her work. A whole school. A whole system." And it was sitting behind a crumbling bookshelf in a storage closet, Weems added dryly, stepping forward. "Discovered, accidentally, by students who, let's just say, weren't exactly where they were supposed to be." There was a ripple of restrained amusement from the teachers in the room. "We've known Friday Addams as a revolutionary, a scholar, and a diplomat," Weems continued. "But until now, no one realized she was also an educator. A founder. She didn't just help establish Nevermore, she was already teaching here. Long before we gave it a name." The board stood in stunned silence as they looked over the ancient parchments once more, no longer just ink on paper, but the living record of a teenage girl whose brilliance had shaped their world in ways they were only beginning to understand. The board continued along the display, their footsteps echoing through the quiet library. Framed beside the lesson plans and journals were a series of aged sketches, some in charcoal, others in ink, depicting what could only be the early designs of Nevermore Academy. "These," a board member began, leaning in, "these are the outer facades of the north and west wings." "And the bell tower," whispered another, pointing. "It's identical. Down to the weather vane." Laid out below the exterior sketches were full floor plans, dozens of them, each annotated in a precise, angular hand. The pages were filled with notes in Latin and Old English, indicating not just the placement of rooms, but the exact width and height of supporting timbers, the length of foundational stones, and the angles of intersecting hallways. One margin contained a full geometric breakdown using the golden ratio. "These weren't just decorative flourishes," the historian said, nearly breathless. "These were engineering plans. Structural blueprints." One skeptical board member, an older man with sharp glasses, looked unconvinced. "Couldn't they have been drafts? Ideas never used?" "We thought so too," the historian replied, "until we overlaid her sketches with our current floor plans. They match exactly. Every brick. Every column. Even the angle of sunlight hitting the west courtyard, she accounted for it in her drawings. And that corridor in the east wing," another board member muttered. "I always thought the bend in the hallway was just bad design. But look, she wrote here, strategic redirection to disrupt line of sight for intruders." Principal Weems stood back, hands clasped behind her. Her expression was calm, but the pride in her eyes was unmistakable. "One of the great myths about Nevermore," she said, "was that Friday Addams didn't just help build it, she designed it. We've all heard the rumors. The girl architect stories. Head architect at 16, someone scoffed softly, but it was without malice, more stunned than disbelieving. "And now you're looking at the proof," Weems said simply. "We never knew how true the stories were, until this." The historian nodded beside her. "And her annotations are genius level. She wasn't just mimicking other buildings of the time, she was improving them. There are even references to earthquake dampening. Centuries ahead of her era. She planned for future repairs," said another. "Here, she even writes about expected erosion on the east foundations and how to reinforce them with volcanic rock." A quiet fell over the room again. "She wasn't just brilliant," one board member said. "She was something else." Now, attention turned to a single parchment resting under special lighting, a charcoal portrait preserved beneath a thin glass pane. Two girls stood side by side in colonial dress, one in deep black, the other in a soft, pale gray. Their braids were identical, their expressions unreadable and calm, with that same quiet intensity that drew viewers in and unsettled them all at once. The girl in black stood slightly apart, her hand resting at her side, while a disembodied one, a hand, independent and half-curled mid-motion, hovered gently over her shoulder. The other girl clutched a worn spellbook close to her chest, its leather cover frayed from use. "They look exactly alike," one teacher murmured. "Both of them," another whispered. A board member leaned in. "Is this real?" "Yes," said the lead historian, stepping forward. "It's been authenticated through multiple channels. The parchment dates back to the early 1600s. The charcoal and binding materials are consistent with known colonial sources from Jericho. And the style? Matches with other known sketches recovered from that period." Principal Weems, standing just off to the side, gave a slight nod to one of her aides. The room dimmed as a projector lit up a screen behind them, revealing a familiar painting, digitally scanned in high definition. The final negotiations of surrender, on display at Pilgrim World. The board turned to look. The painting was crowded and tense, delegates packed on either side of a long table mid-argument. Normies in somber coats. Outcasts in stranger garments. Fingers pointed. Mouths open. Chaos. But at the center of the storm, a girl in black sat quietly writing. Her expression was blank, composed, head slightly tilted. Two dark braids framed her pale face. Behind her stood a tall boy gesturing mid-sentence, and just beside him, a second girl, blonde, serious, clutching a heavy book. "We compared this image with the charcoal portrait," said the historian, tapping the screen. "The resemblance is exact. The girl seated here matches the one in black from the charcoal drawing, down to her braids, the placement of her hand, even the calm disposition. And we know from historical records that Wednesday Addams drafted the terms of surrender," another added. "Her name and signature are on the original treaty, which still resides in Pilgrim World. That's how we verified the handwriting in the other journals as well." "She always wore black," a third historian noted. "Even in formal negotiations. And no other twin outcasts lived in Jericho during that era. Only Friday and Goody." "Then the girl in gray?" a board member asked. "Goody Addams," the first historian said without hesitation. "The spellbook, the posture. We cross-referenced physical descriptions. It all lines up." Principal Weems stepped forward, her tone calm but resolute. "This isn't a legend anymore," she said. "It's a documented legacy." She turned from the screen back to the charcoal portrait. "We've always told the story of Nevermore's founders in pieces. Now, finally, we're starting to see the whole picture." Meanwhile, at the ski resort. The mountain resort was deceptively quaint from the outside, pine lodges, snow-dusted balconies, and the steady hum of ski lifts in the distance. But tucked beneath all that charm was a sprawling outlet mall built into the lower level of the resort. It had everything: luxury brands, designer boutiques, and an overwhelming amount of cheerful lighting. Wednesday hated it immediately. "This was supposed to be a retreat," she said darkly, as Adele pulled her through the first set of glass doors. "Now it's just commercial warfare." Adele grinned. "It's called retail therapy, my anti-capitalist. You need it more than anyone." "I don't need therapy. I need silence. And possibly an exorcism." Wednesday was not a fan of shopping on a normal day, but being dragged through racks of overpriced clothing while upbeat music assaulted her ears was, in her words, a trial worthy of Dante's lesser-known 10th Circle. Still, Adele was relentless. She was already stacking her arms with clothing, sleek black and white outfits from Chanel, a minimalist winter set from Adidas, and one especially modern puffer that Wednesday looked at as if it might bite her. "You need variety," Adele declared, already pushing her toward a dressing room. "I have variety," Wednesday said flatly. "There's black silk, black velvet, black wool, which all look exactly the same to people who aren't, well, you." Adele turned, holding up a long-sleeved black dress from Chanel, simple, austere, high-necked, and floor-length. "Okay, now this? This screams you." Wednesday examined it with clinical detachment. "Acceptable. It resembles something one might wear to a wool reading." "Exactly," Adele said proudly. They moved from store to store. Adele joyfully tried on ski gear and bold accessories. Wednesday stuck to her palette of eternal mourning, long coats with concealed seams, dresses that belonged in a Victorian ghost story, and heavy-soled boots made for trampling the patriarchy. "I don't like shopping," Wednesday muttered, as Adele held up a white scarf with playful skulls. When they got back to their hotel rooms, the Nevermore fencing team, Bianca, Eden, Ajax, Xavier, and Rowan, watched as Wednesday began unpacking her bags. One by one, she pulled out garment after garment, all black. A few had white accents, but it was mostly black. Bianca sighed. "Let me guess. You had the entire outlet store to choose from, and this is what you landed on." Wednesday didn't look up. "It's called discernment." Ajax blinked. "Wait, didn't Adele go with you?" "She did," Eden answered, already flopped on the bed. "But Adele wears black too." So, basically, it was a goth parade with shopping bags. "Her parents are the same," Bianca added. When they dropped her off at Nevermore, they were both decked out in black from head to toe. "And don't forget her grandma," Eden chimed in. "Remember, she wore all black like she was going to a funeral when she visited Nevermore during Loving Friday a few days ago." Xavier gave a low whistle. "So this is what? A four-generation anti-color pact." Rowan just shook his head, amused. "Family preference? ... Wednesday, folding a structured black dress with deliberate precision while staying silent. Bianca rolled her eyes. "It's like they're allergic to joy." While Eden, Ajax, Xavier, Bianca, Yoko, and Rowan were out on the slopes, the conversation drifted away from skiing and toward the historical discovery back at Nevermore, the mysterious charcoal portrait of the Addams twins. "I still say the girl holding the book is Friday," Eden declared, adjusting her goggles. "She just has that scholarly, mastermind energy." "She looks like she's about to hex someone for mispronouncing Latin," Ajax added. "Definitely Friday." Yoko nodded. "She's holding a spellbook. That has to mean something." "But what about the girl in black?" Bianca cut in, expertly weaving down the slope. "She's literally wearing the same style as the girl in the Final Surrender painting. All black. The one actually sitting at the table, writing the treaty. That has to be her." "Yeah, but that could just be symbolism," Eden argued. "Goody was more into magic. Maybe Friday was just more into building things." Xavier shrugged. "I'm still not convinced we can even tell them apart." "Same," Rowan agreed. "They look almost identical. That's kind of the point." "Well, the historians said the portrait matches the surrender painting," Yoko reminded them. "Same braid style, same hand on the shoulder, same deadpan expression. But no names on either one," Ajax said. "Which makes this the most on-brand Addams mystery ever." They all laughed. Bianca smirked. "All right, long-term wager. I say the girl in black is Friday." Eden raised her gloved hand. "Book girl." Ajax, "Book girl." Yoko, "Book girl." Rowan and Xavier exchanged a glance. "We're holding out," Xavier said. "We'll see who wins when the historians figure it out," Bianca grinned. "Winner gets bragging rights and free drinks for the rest of term." "Deal," Ajax said, shaking on it. "Assuming anyone ever figures it out." Chapter 17. After the gang was called in from the slopes for staying out too long, they regrouped at the resort's coffee shop to thaw out with hot drinks. It was supposed to be a quiet moment, until they spotted Wednesday at the counter, locked in a quiet but ruthless exchange with the barista. "I asked for a quad shot," she said in a tone that sounded eerily like a eulogy. "What you gave me is a lukewarm failure, watered down with mediocrity." The barista tried to apologize, stumbling over his words. But Wednesday didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words, sharp as scalpels, sliced straight through him with surgical detachment. By the time she finished, the man looked like he'd aged 5 years and was seriously considering fleeing into the snow. "Holy hell," Ajax muttered, watching from their booth. "Did she just gut that guy with vocabulary?" "She didn't even yell," Yoko whispered, unsettled. "That's the worst part. She said it like she was reading a weather report." Eden shook her head, arms crossed. "Why does Adele just let her do that?" That guy's about to cry into his apron, and she's filming it like it's a comedy skit. She probably thinks it is one, Bianca muttered. Remember when their grandmother defended Wednesday for blowing up the Jericho Challenge show on Loving Friday? Oh yeah, Rowan groaned. Because she didn't win. She didn't win, Eden repeated, exasperated, so she detonated a makeshift bomb on the stage. And their grandmother called it an act of righteous protest, Bianca added with a scoff. To be fair, Xavier said, the guy who won was kind of a tool. Back at the counter, Adele was still recording with mild amusement, sipping her drink while Wednesday accepted her corrected quad shot with the faintest nod. Finally, Wednesday said, turning back to join them. An acceptable beverage. She passed by their booth without a second glance. The barista watched her go like he'd just survived a Category 5 hurricane in human form. I need to sage my coffee, Ajax muttered. Same, Yoko said. Remind me to always stay on our good side, Eden said. The Nevermore gang stood at the top of the slope, bundled in colorful snow gear, each one holding skis or snowboards that clashed with their jackets in the worst possible way. All except two. Wednesday and Adele were head to toe in black coats, black gloves, even the snowboard and skis. They carried gleamed obsidian under the sun. Coach Vlad, standing nearby, glanced at Adele curiously. So, what do you do when you're not chaperoning snow trips? I'm a lawyer, Adele replied smoothly. I work in D.C. I represent outcasts in court. He raised his brows. Respect. I'm just a fencing coach. You say that like it's a bad thing. While they spoke, Eden nudged Wednesday. Come on. Try skiing or snowboarding. It's not that deep. Adele, without looking away from Coach Vlad, added, Wednesday doesn't ski or snowboard unless there's danger involved. That made Ajax, Bianca, Yoko, and Xavier all turn toward them. Rowan smirked. What, she needs to dodge landmines or something? Adele nodded casually. Exactly that. If there's no risk of injury or death, she gets bored. Rowan's smirk widened. Then maybe she should take the next slope down. Unless she's not good at it. Without a word, Wednesday walked past him, with her snowboard from in hands. Adele, already pulling out her phone, grinned. The rest followed suit, holding their phones ready. Everyone but Rowan, who just shoved his hands into his pockets. Wednesday took off with minimal effort, slicing through the snow with calm precision. She crouched slightly, carving an S pattern along the slope, then shifted her weight for a deep cut before popping up into a clean ollie, landing with ease. As she picked up speed, she leaned into a toe-side carve, then executed a controlled butter spin not for flash, just to prove she could. The group stared. Even Bianca, arms crossed, tilted her head slightly in respect. She's good, Ajax muttered. She's too good, Eden frowned. That was smooth. Just as Wednesday reached the middle of the slope, picking up more speed for her next trick, Xavier's attention snapped sideways toward Rowan. He noticed him swipe his hand subtly, almost lazily, like casting off an invisible thread. A second later, Wednesday jerked forward, hard. Her balance broke. Her board caught an edge, and she flew. She flipped once, twice, then began tumbling downhill. As she spun, her survival instincts kicked in. She tucked her arms and legs, shielding her elbows and knees from snapping. Instead of resisting, she rolled with the fall, allowing her momentum to carry through without sudden jerks. She twisted to land on her side, protecting her spine and chest from full impact. The fresh, powdery snow cushioned each roll, and her helmet and padded gear absorbed the rest. By the time she stopped, she was dazed, but very much awake and very annoyed. Wednesday. Adele's voice rang out. She was already sliding downhill, boots kicking up snow. The others followed, calling out as they rushed to her. Rowan didn't move. Xavier did, turning sharply toward Rowan just in time to catch the last of that flicker in his hand. Xavier grabbed him by the collar. What the hell did you just do? Down at the base, Adele dropped to her knees beside Wednesday. Hey, don't move. Are you okay? Wednesday pushed herself up slowly. I tucked, rolled, took the side. You crashed, Eden said, stunned. But like, goth ninja style. I've had worse falls, Wednesday muttered, brushing snow off her face. You could have cracked your skull, Ajax said, still pale. I wore a helmet, unlike half of you. Yoko shook her head. You need to get checked out. She needs an ambulance, Coach Vlad said, already pulling out his phone. I object, Wednesday said. Overruled, Adele and Coach Vlad replied in unison. Wednesday sat stiffly on a fold-out stretcher at the base of the slope, wrapped in a thermal blanket by an over-concerned paramedic. Her hair was dusted with snow, her braid half undone, and her expression deeply unamused. The flashing red and blue lights of the emergency team pulsed faintly against the snow, painting the white landscape in strokes of urgency. I'm fine, Wednesday said again, sharper this time, as one of the paramedics gently pressed on her arm. And we're just verifying, the EMT said, unfazed by her glare. You took a hard tumble. We're checking for fractures, spinal trauma, or signs of a concussion. They had already done a primary survey, checking her airway, breathing, and circulation, and were now in the secondary assessment, moving carefully as they palpated along her ribs and spine, watching her face for signs of pain. One EMT held a small flashlight and checked pupil response, while another checked her reflexes and orientation by asking questions: name, date, location. Wednesday answered flatly, Wednesday Addams. Somewhere in the 8th circle of hell. The year is irrelevant. Time is an illusion. Despite her protest, they wrapped a cervical collar around her neck as a precaution while they finished the exam. A few feet away, the rest of the Nevermore crew had gathered, exchanging anxious glances. Xavier and Rowan were still arguing at the top of the slope, unaware of the drama unfolding below. That was reckless, Bianca said, arms folded. Serves her right for showing off. Wednesday said coolly, her voice just loud enough to cut across the group. Something pushed me. Pushed you. Ajax repeated, raising a brow. Eden and Yoko exchanged skeptical glances. You sure it wasn't just a fluke? You caught an edge or something? Before Wednesday could answer, Adele raised a hand, silencing everyone. Let's not guess, she said calmly, pulling out her phone. We did filmed it. Slow Emo should tell us everything. The others quickly followed suit, scrubbing back to the moment Wednesday went down. Adele narrowed her eyes as she pinched the screen and slowed the footage frame by frame. There, she said quietly, pointing to the exact second. In the slowed video, they could see Wednesday snowboarding effortlessly, until a subtle ripple in the air behind her seemed to push forward unnaturally. A faint shimmer. Her body jerked forward as if hit by an invisible force. Is that? Yoko blinked. That wasn't the wind, Eden admitted. Adele's eyes flicked up toward the top of the slope. Where are? Everyone turned to see Xavier and Rowan still in a heated exchange, both gesturing, though Rowan's hands were clenched tighter than before. Just as Xavier shoved a finger toward Rowan's chest. Rowan flinched. His hand moved. A sudden telekinetic pulse flared. Xavier stumbled backward and then vanished over the ridge. Xavier! Adele and Coach Vlad shouted in unison. There was no time to react. Xavier tumbled down the slope, limbs flailing. Unlike Wednesday, he didn't tuck or roll. His arms flailed wildly, and his back hit a hard patch of snow. Shit! Ajax was already running. Move, one of the EMTs snapped, as the medical team, already on site for Wednesday, immediately sprang into action. A stretcher was grabbed, and 2 techs took off running downhill with practiced urgency. Adele clutched her phone, her jaw set. Wednesday slowly pulled off the neck brace and handed it to the nearest EMT. Told you I was fine. The EMT blinked. Well, you passed every test. You're lucky. No visible injuries. Wednesday stood, adjusting her black coat as the red and blue lights washed over her pale face. Luck had nothing to do with it. I was prepared. She turned and looked up the slope as the crew swarmed around Xavier, lifting him onto the stretcher. Rowan stood frozen in place, pale and wide-eyed. Bianca exhaled shakily. What the hell is wrong with him? No one answered. But Wednesday's eyes narrowed as she watched Rowan. The hospital doors swung open as EMTs rushed Xavier inside, his face contorted in pain but fully conscious. His right arm had been braced to his chest in a makeshift sling, his jacket cut away to allow access. A growing bruise colored the side of his jaw where his head had slammed the snow. Possible dislocated shoulder, maybe a hairline fracture, one of the EMTs said. Vitals stable. He's responsive. Let's get him on a line and do scans when we arrive. Coach Vlad turned sharply to the rest of the group, his voice sharp and clear in the crisp air. Bianca, you're in charge until I get back. But none of you are allowed to leave the hotel. You're not to step outside. Do I make myself clear? Bianca opened her mouth to protest, but Coach Vlad's eyes left no room for negotiation. She shut it and nodded. Understood. Rowan stood off to the side, silent and rigid, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. Wednesday, having slipped out of view for a second, tried to quietly melt into the crowd, but Adele caught her arm. Oh no, you're coming with us, Adele said, her tone final. We need to make sure you don't have a concussion. I already passed the EMT's inspection, Wednesday muttered, clearly annoyed. And yet you nearly kissed a tree halfway down a slope. You're coming. At that moment, things scurried down from Adele's shoulder and landed on Yoko's arm with a light plop. He gave a stern, deliberate wave toward Rowan, then curled his fingers into the classic, I'm watching you gesture before perching dramatically on Bianca's shoulder. I'm leaving thing to keep watch, Adele said, turning to the group. If Rowan so much as breathes funny, Thing will notice. Thing gave a smug thumbs up and flexed his fingers proudly. With that, Wednesday, Adele, and Coach Vlad climbed into the back of the ambulance as it pulled away in a flurry of snow, the sirens off but lights flashing across the icy trees. Back on the slope, Bianca glanced at Eden and Yoko before her eyes narrowed on Rowan. As the ambulance disappeared down the snowy road with Xavier, the wind cut sharper and tempers threatened to spiral. Coach Vlad and Adele were already gone with Wednesday and Xavier, but the rest of the Nevermore gang stood frozen at the base of the slope, processing everything that had just happened. Bianca stepped forward. Everyone. Look at me, she said, her voice deceptively calm. And then she sang. It wasn't loud. Just a soft, melodic ripple, hypnotic and silk smooth, that laced itself around each of their minds. Yoko, Eden, Ajax, and even Rowan blinked, their anger and confusion quieting as the subtle compulsion tugged at their will. Back to the hotel. Now. They obeyed. By the time they reached the suite and the door shut behind them, the enchantment lifted. The calm that had been holding them together unraveled immediately. What the hell was that? Eden snapped, rounding on Rowan before the others even sat down. Were you trying to kill Wednesday and Xavier? Thing. The disembodied sentient hand with 5 fingers was already perched on the desk, waving frantically. His little fingers gestured wildly in an effort to calm the situation. But Eden wasn't looking at him. She said she wanted a near-death experience, Rowan replied, shrugging, though his voice wavered. And besides, Wednesday was fine. Wednesday was fine, Ajax echoed, stepping forward. But Xavier isn't. His arm was bent the wrong way, man. And you pushed him, Yoko said sharply. Telekinesis or not, you pushed him. Why? Rowan shifted uncomfortably. She's dangerous. She's going to destroy Nevermore. What? Bianca muttered. We all know that, but that doesn't give you the right to push people off down a hill. Things slapped what would be his face, if he had one, and then threw his fingers up at Rowan, flicking and twitching in outrage. Just a hand, and yet somehow, unmistakably disappointed. If you only knew what she is about to do. Rowan muttered. You would want her dead too. Bianca stepped in closer, her expression stone cold. If Xavier needs surgery because of you, it won't be just your grades that suffer. Trust me, Eden added, Principal Weems won't be the only one once in your head. Chapter 18. The hospital doors burst open as Xavier was wheeled into the emergency room. His face was pale, jaw clenched in pain, and his arm was bent unnaturally, clearly fractured. The EMTs shouted out vitals as they passed the front desk. 15-year-old male. Sustained a high-velocity fall down a snowy slope. Possible fractures to the lower limb. Helmet intact, conscious on arrival, vitals stable. A trauma team sprang into action. One nurse immediately began cutting away the snow gear with trauma shears. A doctor at his side checked pupil reaction and mental clarity while another palpated along his spine and ribs, carefully looking for signs of internal injury or broken bones. "Where does it hurt the most?" the doctor asked. "My arm," Xavier managed through gritted teeth. They gently lifted the limb, stabilizing it while a portable X-ray machine was wheeled in. Saline was set up, pain meds administered, and vitals monitored continuously. The team worked quickly and precisely, checking for signs of head injury, spinal trauma, or hypothermia. In the waiting area, Coach Vlad sat with his face buried in his hands, muttering, "How am I going to explain this to Principal Weems?" Adele, cool-headed despite the chaos, stood up from her seat. "I'll call Vincent Thorpe." Coach Vlad blinked at her. "You have his number?" "He's one of my many clients," she replied simply, already dialing. "Represented him during that small litigation scandal over at the Global Council for Outcast Rights. Charming man. Terrible at keeping NDAs." Wednesday, seated beside her with arms crossed and a small scrape on her temple, turned her head. "You keep interesting company." "I keep dangerous company," Adele corrected, holding the phone to her ear as it began to ring. "Don't worry, you're still top 5. Before Wednesday could reply, one of the EMTs approached. "Miss Addams, we really recommend you get checked as well. Just to rule out internal injuries." "She says she's fine," Coach Vlad said, looking up. "She always says she's fine," Adele said flatly. "Do it anyway." Wednesday sighed like someone being forced into a kindergarten checkup, but allowed the doctor to lead her down the corridor. Coach Vlad and Adele sat down and took out their phones simultaneously, Coach Vlad calling Principal Weems and Adele speaking quietly but firmly to Vincent Thorpe. Hours passed. Then, the whir of helicopter blades roared overhead. Vincent Thorpe arrived at the hospital flanked by 2 assistants, his expression thunderous. His expensive coat swept behind him as he stormed through the automatic doors. "Where's my son? What the hell happened?" Coach Vlad stood quickly, but Adele raised a hand, stepping between them before he could speak. "No sugarcoating," she said, eyes sharp. "He had an argument with a teammate. The boy pushed him down the slope with telekinesis." Thorpe's jaw clenched. "Who was it?" "He's back at the hotel under lockdown with the others," Adele said without hesitation. "And he won't be going anywhere." Thorpe's eyes narrowed. "He won't have a school to go back to when I'm through." Coach Vlad exhaled, already regretting everything about this trip. Adele stood at the edge of the hospital emergency room as Vincent Thorpe approached, his face tight with urgency. She stepped forward calmly, intercepting him before he reached the nurse's station. "Mr. Thorpe," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I was there. I saw what happened." Vincent stopped, his jaw clenched. "Go on." "We were near the 4th slope marker with the others when Wednesday crashed. It looked serious at first, but she walked away with minor bruises. Paramedics were already checking her when I noticed Xavier and Rowan weren't with the group." She exhaled. "I looked up and saw them at the top. They were arguing. Xavier was furious, probably about what happened to Wednesday. The others noticed too. Coach Vlad and I saw it clearly." She paused, then looked him in the eye. "Rowan used telekinesis. He shoved Xavier, there's no doubt about it. It wasn't an accident." Vincent didn't speak, but the shift in his expression was unmistakable. Xavier fell hard, she continued. He didn't brace himself. Didn't tuck or roll. It wasn't like Wednesday's fall. His shoulder was dislocated. Arm twisted. Still conscious when we reached him. She nodded toward the operating room doors. The EMTs acted fast. But what happened up there, it was deliberate. Vincent's silence stretched for a moment before he nodded once, curtly. "Thank you," he said. His voice was flat, but his eyes burned. Wednesday sat on the emergency room gurney, her neck brace already removed, while a doctor shined a penlight into her eyes. Her arms were crossed, expression as frosty as the mountain outside. She wasn't listening to the doctor's concussion questions. She was listening to the voices just outside the curtain. Adele's tone was low and steady, recounting everything that had happened. Vincent Thorpe stood in silence as she detailed the moment Rowan pushed Xavier. Wednesday could hear the strain in his breath, like a man trying to hold back a storm. The curtain rustled open slightly. Vincent's gaze swept the room before landing on her. His tone was sharp, but not unkind. "My son is in surgery with a shattered shoulder and a fractured arm. You? You walked away with a few bruises." Wednesday didn't blink. "Because I was taught what to do if I ever took a tumble like that. I was 5 when I learned how to ski. 6 when I added snowboarding." Vincent looked unconvinced, so she explained coolly. "If you lose control on a slope, the worst thing you can do is panic. You don't fight the fall, you go with it. Tuck your arms and legs, protect your head, and roll with your momentum. Let the snow absorb the impact." A beat. "Your son didn't do any of that." Adele, standing beside them, gave a small smile. "She's right. That's exactly what she did. Saved herself from what could have been a much worse injury." Vincent said nothing. He simply turned and walked out. Back at the resort, the police arrived within the hour. They were efficient, professional, and clearly briefed. Eden, Ajax, Yoko, and Bianca were all brought in separately. All 4 gave the same account. "We saw Rowan use his powers," Eden said. "It was subtle, but it was there." "It looked like a flick of his wrist," Ajax added. "Right before Xavier went flying." "I didn't want to believe it," Yoko muttered. "But there's no other explanation." Bianca was the last to speak. "It doesn't make sense. Rowan's intense, sure, but this? He's never been violent." The officers wrote everything down. Finally, they turned to Rowan. He sat stiffly in the lodge conference room, arms bound in front of him with suppression cuffs. He looked pale, hollowed out, but not afraid. "She was going to destroy Nevermore," he muttered. "Wednesday, you don't understand. My mother left me the book. It explains everything. We just need to find it." The officer frowned. "So you're saying you meant to push her?" Rowan shook his head quickly. "No. I didn't mean to hurt Xavier. That part, it wasn't supposed to happen. It was an accident." That's when Vincent entered. He moved with quiet force, brushing past the officers before anyone could stop him. Rowan flinched at the sight of him. "You put my son in the hospital," Vincent said, voice low and cold. "You left him bleeding in the snow." "I didn't mean to hurt him," Rowan said desperately. "I was trying to stop her." Vincent leaned in. "Let me make something clear. You're not going to talk about my son, or that girl, or your damn prophecy." The room went still. "I don't care what your mother believed. You attacked Xavier. You'll answer for that." Rowan didn't speak again. And Vincent didn't look back as the officers led Rowan out in cuffs. Meanwhile, back in Jericho, the Weathervane Cafe was quieter than usual. Spring break meant fewer teens lounging around or ordering overpriced milkshakes. Tyler was wiping down the counter when he noticed Miss Thornhill sitting at the corner booth again, 3rd time this week. She smiled as he approached, and he noticed how her eyes lingered on him a moment too long. "You've been awfully quiet lately, Tyler," she said, stirring her tea. "But then again, I've been more talkative than usual, haven't I?" Tyler offered a polite smile, but she picked up on his unease. "Don't mind me," she added with a light laugh. "I suppose I've just been Lonely. Exhausted too. Nevermore students might be on break, but thanks to those newly discovered writings by Wednesday Addams, the rest of us are working overtime. She sipped her tea, then tilted her head. What about you? Jericho High's on spring break too, right? Why aren't you out with your friends? You only get 1 week. Tyler shrugged, wiping the same spot on the counter again. I'm saving up for something. A spark lit in her eyes. Oh! Would this have anything to do with the invitation Wednesday's grandmother extended? That little countryside visit she mentioned during the loving Friday holiday. Tyler smiled, the guarded kind that hinted at hope. Maybe. She leaned back, clearly amused. Well, that would be nice. I suppose you're hoping to spend more time with Wednesday, outside of Jericho. Tyler gave a small nod, then changed the subject. The historic documents have been the talk of the town lately. My dad says the mayor wants to host an exhibition. Something to bring in tourists. He seemed optimistic when he stopped by earlier. Said the school board might actually go for it. Miss Thornhill hummed, tapping her nail against her mug. Do you know much about Wednesday Addams? Her work? Yeah, Tyler said. A bit. They say she was extraordinary. Some of her writings even formed the foundation of Nevermore's founding principles. My dad said she finalized the school's most sacred charter. Pretty impressive. Miss Thornhill smiled again, though this time it didn't quite reach her eyes. And what about you and Wednesday? She asked suddenly. Are you her boyfriend? Tyler laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. That's kind of obvious, isn't it? She raised an eyebrow. Well, she certainly didn't make it obvious to her grandmother. She denied your relationship quite firmly that day. I wonder, are you more committed to her than she is to you? The air shifted. Tyler's smile faded. His hand clenched around the rag in his hand until his knuckles turned white. Of course we're both committed, he said, his voice lower, firmer. She's mine. Miss Thornhill blinked slowly. She didn't comment on his sudden change in tone, but she noticed it. When Tyler got home, he tossed his backpack on the floor and collapsed onto his bed. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind that made every second feel heavier than it should. He pulled out his phone, unlocking it with a swipe, and stared at the most recent call, Adele Addams. Not Wednesday's name, but close enough. A few days ago, Wednesday had called him using her cousin's number. She asked him something strange. Do you have blackouts? The question caught him off guard, but underneath it, he could tell she was worried. She cared. That alone had lit something in him that lasted for days. After that, Adele had sent over pictures and videos. Clips of Wednesday fencing, still as sharp and intense as ever. Shots of her on a ski slope, perfectly balanced, dressed in all black like the Grim Reaper on vacation. One photo showed her mid-sentence, roasting a barista at the resort's coffee shop. Tyler couldn't hear what she said, but the barista's expression and Adele's silent giggle behind the camera said enough. It wasn't much, but it was everything to him. He stared at Adele's number now, thumb hovering over the screen. He wanted to call. Just to hear Wednesday's voice. Just to ask her how she was. But he stopped himself. It's not her phone, he reminded himself. She borrowed it. If I call her cousin and it annoys her, maybe she won't let Wednesday use it again. So he waited, and hated every second of it. He glanced at the date on the screen, Friday. She was supposed to be back Sunday. Just 2 more days. But the silence felt longer than that. She hadn't called since 2 days ago, and now the worry was creeping in again. He trusted her, but the not knowing, the waiting, the imagining, all of it made his chest tighten. He tossed the phone on the bed and rubbed his face with both hands, trying to shake off the frustration. Just 2 more days, he muttered. But that didn't make the waiting any easier. Tyler laid on his bed that night, one arm folded behind his head, the other holding his phone inches from his face. The screen's soft glow was the only light in the room. He scrolled through the pictures again. Adele had really gone all out. Wednesday in a long black coat in front of a boutique mirror, unimpressed with everything on the rack. Another one of her in a mock turtleneck, adjusting a silver necklace with her usual deadpan precision. And then one photo that made his chest ache a little. In it, Wednesday stood just slightly off-center, caught mid-step in the snow, one eyebrow raised as if she'd caught Adele taking the photo without asking. Her expression was pure Wednesday, annoyed, brilliant, and very much alive. He stopped on that one. His thumb hesitated for just a second before he tapped set as wallpaper. The image blinked, then settled across the background of his phone. It felt a little silly, like something a middle schooler would do. But he didn't care. He just wanted something of her near, even if it was just pixels on a screen. 2 more days, he whispered to himself again, locking the phone and resting it on his chest. But sleep didn't come easy. Not when she felt that far away. He stared at the phone, her last words echoing in his head. Then nothing. Just black.